I've been receiving messages and reviews about the essay that I recently posted online for review that is entitled Why Sanctions Failed to Cripple the Rhodesian Economy. That is a study of the political economy of Rhodesian sanctions from 1965 to 1979. And I've just decided to portray this message and to give a brief summary of the reason why I argue against conventional interpretations and the reason why I believe that it is an argument that is worth noting. Well, the argument that has been portrayed before by economists and economic historians that have studied this issue before is that Ian Smith was able to survive the environment of economic sanctions during his time, primarily because he was able to introduce economic policies that were able to combat the effects of sanctions. And they cite this so-called import substitution industrialization as the major reason for his success. And they've cited that Ian Smith was able to put in place protectionist policies that were able to encourage local industries to produce commodities that were previously imported, which is an ideology that was borrowed from the studies that were made by economists who looked into the political economy of post-colonial Latin American countries. There is so much truth to the claims that are raised by these economists and economic historians, and it is very true that Smith was very good with his creative policies of busting the sanctions that were imposed against his government. But the argument that I raise in this article is that the success of Ian Smith was not primarily based on this economic explanation, but was primarily based on the politics of the application of these sanctions by Britain and the United Nations. I argue that the application of these sanctions, especially by the British government, was a way of saving face. It was actually a way of shedding crocodile tears, because we should analyze this within the broader context of the end of the Second World War and the creation of the United Nations, as well as this ideology of national sovereignty. What it meant was that Britain had to assume the role of a decolonizer. And what Britain didn't want was a situation whereby it was going to assume the role of a decolonizer to the disadvantage of the white minority population in Rhodesia. So Smith was their fellow friend, and they didn't want to create a scenario in which he would not be comfortable and the white minority population in the country would be disadvantaged. And this is evidenced by what is found in the archives and the conversations that were made between Harold Wilson and Ian Smith in 1965. Harold Wilson, who happened to be the Prime Minister of Britain at this time, is said to have went to Rhodesia in 1965 before November 11, and he had a conversation with Ian Smith in which he assured him that in case he declares UDI, the British government would not use force against his government. So Smith, on November 11, was able to declare this UDI with the assurance that the British government would not use force. So what they genuinely believed when they made this deal was that Africans in Rhodesia could easily be persuaded to approve the deal, which is not what then happened. And it explains the reason why I've decided to do this research. And I'm going to do this research, and I'm going to provide as much ample evidence as possible, drawing upon hitherto unexplored sources from the National Archives of Zimbabwe in particular.